Good morning, everybody. Yesterday, I was reporting on this story from the CBC. Refugees sponsors welcome Syrian family to Canada. And I wanted to tell you a bit more about this story, a bit of an update. I did a bit more digging on it. As I said at the end of the video, I had questions. The refugee hub was one of the questions. I was wondering, what's the mechanism? How does this work? And my point of these videos isn't to push a conservative bent or it is to promote Maxime Bernier a little bit, but the rest of it, I'm just trying to put out accurate information. So a lot of people say that I'm conservative. I used to be a hardcore liberal. I voted for Justin Trudeau. I will never vote for Justin Trudeau again. But I was young and naive once, and I thought that he wasn't a lying liar. But that's beside the point. My point isn't to be I'm not pushing an ideology, or I'm not trying to push an ideology here. I'm just trying to tell you the information that I've found and put it together in a story that makes coherent sense. Okay? So I hope you enjoy what I do. I'm glad you're here and watching. And well, let's go down this rabbit hole together. So yesterday I reported about this, and there's more to it. So they've only been in Canada a short while, but a group of Syrian refugees living in Brockville, Ontario, is already paying it forward by sponsoring a family of 8 from their homeland. Kailee and Avir Sultan and their 6 young children arrived in Ottawa International on Tuesday to cheers, tears, and hugs from their sponsors, who pinned tiny maple leaves to the newcomers' lapels. The sponsors will act as guides, translators, and an extended family to the Sultans as they adapt to their new life in Brockville. And I'm going to skip down because the point, I went through this yesterday, and my question yesterday was, is the intention of these programs, whichever programs are being used to bring these people here, is the intention of these programs to be used by refugees themselves to bring other people here, or people who were recently refugees who are now who are now full-time residents of Canada? And we're going to get to that in just a minute. So met at the recruitment drive. Kailee Brennan, an outreach officer with the Refugee Hub, and I spoke with her, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, back to the article. First met the families in August at a recruitment event in Brockville. They came hoping to bring their own relatives to Canada, Brennan said, but soon learned that that's not how the program works. After a prolonged discussion in Arabic, the translator, Brockville businessman Ahmed declared the group had decided to open their arms to a family they didn't know. I told them, "You're not a refugee anymore. You are now 100% Canadian, and Canadians love to do something good," said Kadra, who came to Canada from Syria in 1995. And so, as I said, I had more questions, and I wanted to know what was the mechanism used to bring these people here. And as I said yesterday, it was probably there was room left in a program, and as we looked at the Shapiro group and the Giesta group, I believe I'm saying that right now, Giesta group, those NGOs are designed specifically to, quote, fill in the gaps, right? So that's exactly what these people are doing. The Refugee Hub, that's what their job is. They're doing it well, right? They're finding money, they're connecting sponsors, but I'm not trying to comment on that job. That's their job, and that's something that they believe in, and I'm glad that they found it. But my point is, are these programs intended to be used this way? Right? And so first, I think we need to understand the Canada's private sponsorship of refugees program. So here's the background. Canadian citizens and permanent residents provide opportunities for some refugees to find protection and build a new life here through Canada's private sponsorship of refugees program. Since the late 1970s, the private sponsors have brought more than 288,000 refugees to Canada, over and above those resettled with government funding. Private sponsorships are arranged by ordinary Canadians who are often, although not always, associated with faith-based organizations, community associations, humanitarian organizations, educational institutions, and ethnic groups. Note, it doesn't say, just pausing here, it doesn't say NGOs. It doesn't say international, 5 continent NGOs, right? These are supposed to be community-based, but it doesn't talk about that. Okay, back to the article. These groups agree to provide the refugees with support for the duration of the sponsorship period and are currently located in more than 300 communities across Canada. Support is usually provided for 12 months, starting from the refugee's arrival in Canada or until the refugee becomes self-sufficient, whichever comes first. Sponsors identify who they wish to sponsor. Private sponsors are required to demonstrate that they have necessary funds and volunteer base to support the refugees they are sponsoring. Private sponsors typically support the sponsored refugee by providing costs of food, rent and household utilities, and other day-to-day living expenses, providing clothing, furniture, and other household goods, locating interpreters, selecting a family physician and dentist, assisting with applying for provincial health care coverage, enrolling children in school and adults in language training, introducing newcomers to people with similar personal interests, providing orientation with regards to banking services, transportation, etc., and helping in the search for employment. Okay, so fine. My question was, and the refugee hub has a whole lot of information, and you can go to About Us to find out our work. And I went to programs to get here. And so the programs bring you to sponsoring a refugee. And then I got here. And this is the first, like the handbook for sponsoring groups. Okay, so click here, and it's no longer on the Refugee Hub website. So I wanted you to see that. And I clicked on who can sponsor. So we already know what the criteria are. You have to be a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. And so here is a little bit more information on who can sponsor and what is sponsorship. And here's the program that these refugees were brought in under, the Blended Visa Office Referred, BVOR. And so that's the structure of bringing them in. Okay, so we'll read this here. Sponsorship is a legal commitment to ensure that sponsored refugees have the necessary support to integrate into life in Canada. Sponsors must provide basic financial support, example for lodging and food, and care for the sponsored refugee for up to 12 months or until the sponsored refugee becomes self-sufficient, whichever comes first. Okay, so what happens if after the 12 months the person hasn't found a job and doesn't have the resources to support themselves? It says, in exceptional circumstances, the length of sponsorship may end up to be 36 months. Sponsorship is a three-way partnership between sponsors, the government of Canada, and the refugees themselves. The sponsorship demonstrates their legal commitment by signing an undertaking application to sponsor called a sponsorship undertaking. Okay, so within that context, the group of refugees, and I spoke with, as I said, the news wasn't very clear about the group's makeup. And I thought, well, if they're refugees sponsoring refugees, how does that work? What mechanism were they using? And so I spoke with Kailee, as I said, and she said that the leader of the group is a Canadian citizen. And I believe that she said the leader of the group was the translator, Ahmed Kadra. I believe that's who it is, but I could be mistaken about that. So apologies, Mr. Kadra, if I've got that wrong. I may have misheard. The other members of the group are former refugees themselves who were sponsored, and Kailee said they were not sponsored by the Refugee Hub. They were sponsored from local churches in Brockville area. And she said that they arrived in between 2015 and 2016, so they've been here for a few years. And I asked about the funding, and she pointed me to the blog, and here is how this all works. Because a couple of questions I had is, how does the 3.5 million break down to funding for everybody? And two, how much does a family of four cost ballpark? Because privacy laws in Canada prevent people from divulging, this group costs this much, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very different time than it used to be in the 90s, 80s. And that's fine. I don't mind. The ballpark figure is great. So and she pointed me here, and she was very helpful and very, very nice. And I could hear that she really believes in her work. So I told her I meant no disrespect in asking the questions that I was asking. I told her that I just wanted to get as accurate information out as possible. So that's what my goal is here. So back to that. Here's the Refugee Hub's news release. Hundreds of refugees to settle in Canada by year's end after receipt of $3.5 million in donations ensures community sponsorship spaces are filled. And this was printed November 14th, 2018. So I could have read this yesterday. I just didn't know it existed, and I didn't have the time to look it up. But here we go, updating it today. So after a handful of philanthropic leaders committed to a combined total of nearly $3.5 million to cover the costs associated with settling 175 families, the cost to sponsor a family of four for 4 years under the Blended Visa Office Referred, or BVOR program, is approximately $18,000. The amount is normally fundraised by sponsor groups waiting to volunteer their time and energy to welcome refugees to Canada, but can take time to generate, right? Because to bring a family of four, it costs $18,000, and to get that kind of money fundraised, it takes time, right? And this is me, this is not the article, but in my opinion, part of the mechanism of having community fundraised spots is that it naturally prevents a big deluge of people, because the fundraising is only as much as people can give, right? But when you introduce international NGOs, 5-continent NGOs who can just give the money, here's $18,000. There you go. Hope you don't need that after 12 months. And then what happens after 12 months? After 12 months, they go on to social assistance, right? because they're on track to become citizens, or at least permanent residents, as we can see by the group that has sponsored them. So this is my problem. When you fast track a system that is meant to have a natural limit, and the natural limit is meant to be set by the population themselves doing the fundraising, and then you take it outside and use these other systems, these foreign monies, to bring in a population, my question stands from yesterday. At what point does it become inappropriate? 10, 50, 100, 700? At what point? Right? This family of 8 costs more than $18,000. This family of 8 that's coming in costs more than $18,000. So the NGO is, and each, like I said at the beginning, each situation is different. It's evaluated differently. So each family, like the family that came in, it would be, if a family of 4 is 18,000, it would be presumably more than 18,000, right? So it's just that family, if all of them can't work, and there's 6 children, so they're not going to work. They're not going to be that boon on the taxpayers' dollars like it's trying to be sold to us. They are going to be. All of those kids are going to be in school. So that costs money, a lot of money. And I've talked about that in the past too. So like I said, these programs are supposed to have kind of a natural ebb and flow to them. But these NGOs are coming in to fill in the gaps. Is that what Canada wants? That is the fundamental question. That's the question that this whole video is the crux of. That's the whole reason I'm doing these videos, because the press is very, very fixated on doing good guy immigration, good guy multiculturalism, good guy, all of these stories, and they're not asking the tough questions. And thankfully, back to the refugee hub, they are putting out good information. I'm glad for that. We can have a discussion about this, right? So back to this article. I want to get the rest of this out because it seems like I'm just talking and not giving you information. So I apologize for that. With that in mind, the University of Ottawa Refugee Hub and the Jewish Family Services, in partnership with founding donors the Shapiro Foundation, an American-based charity, and the Giesta Foundation in Vancouver, launched a unique time-limited fund to support the sponsorship of hundreds of refugees identified by the United Nations High Commissioner of Refugees. The UNHCR, the Refugee Sponsorship Training Program, over 35 sponsorship agreement holders, and many community organizations across Canada were also integral partners in this rapid mobilization. The fund was created August 7th, 2018 to encourage participation in sponsorship and ensure no spots in the BVOR program remained unused. The Canadian government offered 1,500 spaces in 2018 through the BVOR program, which matches Canadian sponsorship groups with refugees the UNHCR identifies as needing resettlement. Over 1,000 spots were still unclaimed as of August. Unused spots would have disappeared at the year's end without the quick action of the groups and people involved. Under the BVOR program, settlement costs are shared between Government of Canada and sponsors. Sponsor groups are also responsible for all aspects of welcoming and integrating the newcomers into their communities. The deadline for Canadian sponsors to apply for the fund was September 17th, 2018. So, luckily they were having this recruitment event, and these people showed up trying to get their family in, and that doesn't work so well, but they can sponsor another group of people with sponsorship money from somebody else. Is that the intention of having ordinary Canadians sponsor this? Is that what was meant? Or is this use of filling gaps with transnational 5-continent NGOs maybe an abuse of our system that maybe we should be talking about? Because maybe flooding Canada with people who should be rebuilding their country is bad for Canada and bad for the country we're pulling the movers and shakers who should be there building their country to Canada. Why? We're not helping. The last thing I wanted to leave you with is this. This is Peter Thiel. And man, he absolutely goes bananas on multiculturalism and political correctness. And I wish I could just play the whole video. Go watch the video. It will put your jaw on the floor with how right he is, how, he's spot on with the whole thing. He says that A culture of complaint leads to a culture of blame. Looking for racism everywhere, you'll find racism everywhere. Multiculturalism and political correctness should be thought of as two sides of the same coin. Multiculturalism finds the victim, and political correctness goes after the victimizer. And that's at 5 minutes and 4 seconds. So time index is in the description, and a link to the video, as well as a link to all of the stuff that I showed you in my video today, is also in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate your time. Check out thepeoplespartyofcanada.ca.